Shwmae a chroeso I Sgwrs, podlediad Consortiwm Canolbarth y De. Yn y podlediad hwn byddwch chi'n clywed y trafodaethau diweddara am bob math o bethau addysg. Hello and welcome to Sgwrs, the Central South Consortium podcast. In this podcast we'll bring you the very latest discussions on all things education.
Hello and welcome to Sgwrs, the CSC Consortium podcast. I'm Emma Jackson-Phillips, part of the literacy team here at Central South Consortium. Today we're tackling a challenging but essential question. How can schools handle sensitive or controversial issues in the classroom in ways that keep learners and teachers safe, build a culture of respect, and equip young people with lifelong skills to engage thoughtfully with the world around them? This isn't just about strategies for discussion, it's about protection, confidence, and creating whole school approaches that safeguard professional integrity. It's also about recognising the realities of the modern learner. Our young people are growing up in a world of sometimes 24/7 screens, social media, artificial intelligence, fake news, and echo chambers. And at the same time, research tells us that attention spans, connectedness, and reading habits are in decline. According to the National Literacy Trust 2024 report, only 1 in 3 children and young people now say that they enjoy reading in their free time, the lowest figure since their records began. Against that backdrop, the Curriculum for Wales framework calls on us to develop ethically informed citizens capable of navigating difference, diversity, and debate. Avoidance isn't an option. If schools don't address these issues, misconceptions and difficulties risk deepening, and we won't be preparing our young people for life after school. That's why, in this episode, we'll hear from practitioners who are happy to share their journeys and approaches. You'll hear how they prepare for, scaffold, and promote positive discussions, from whole school policies to classroom strategies that work in practice. So to that end, I'm delighted to welcome our guests. We've got Verity Conlon, Literacy Lead at Archdeacon John Lewis Church in Wales Primary School from Bridgend, Judith Williams, who leads on teaching and learning at Ysgol Gyfun Gymraeg, Llangynnoed Bridgend, and we've got Myfanwy Bowering, Head of English and AOLE Lead at St Illtyd's Catholic School in Cardiff. So today we'll explore how planning, practice and professional judgment can turn potentially risky conversations into opportunities for meaningful learning. So we'll launch into our first question. If we accept that teachers can't and shouldn't be left to navigate controversial issues alone, how can a well-designed whole school policy turn potentially risky discussion topics into opportunities for safe, consistent learning across the curriculum? Not an easy question.
So it's about having that whole school culture, really, where every stakeholder is involved in the plan, do and review sort of stage of schools. And a policy is obviously a great way to start off, where it's clearly communicating to everybody what we are setting out to do and what we're addressing. Leading with that, we can include other teachers, school leaders, parents, governors, people in the community that can feed into it, as well as pupil voice through things like Senedd committees and children bringing up what they want to learn and how they want to learn it. So it's particularly in our school, we develop our policies in a range of ways. So first we'll have like workshops, training sessions where first of all it'll start with staff, then we'll choose to speak with children and go to whole class situations, lead it into our Senedd groups, and then our governors, and because we're a church school, our church feed into that as well. Particularly when we were doing an RSE policy, which highlights a lot of these sort of issues that you can have. We also will tap into outside agencies like the NHS and things like that as well. So it's just putting that policy then into practice, making sure everybody's aware of what that entails, making curriculum revisions, teaching the guidelines, and how you assess these sort of conversations and things that are going on, make any changes then to it if need be, and then the allocation of the resources and the budgets and things to allow individuals to be able to make sure that the opportunities are there in classroom practice. It's linked into our staff's professional development. So if there's anything that training wise that needs to come out to ensure that they can adhere to the policies and the things that are involved, we do that as well. And then again, everybody taking accountability for that policy and having ownership, valuing it, and showing that it is adhered to by everyone by sharing it with parents on our website and things like that.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. It sounds like a really sort of comprehensive approach at that primary school levels. Thank you, Verity. I don't know whether from a secondary point of view, anybody, Myfanwy or Judith, you wanted to add to that in terms of sort of working with stakeholders and
yes, it's very different with primaries and secondaries in terms of the way that secondaries tend to be separated very much into their areas of learning and engaging with those. And the new curriculum for Wales very specifically has ethically informed citizen as a whole school strategy. For that reason, I think that it is something that will cover lots of different areas, but maybe in very different ways. So the way that the RE department covers those topics, similarly, there's a lot of policy, and we also are a Catholic school, so that is done very much in collaboration with the church, with guidance, and then those similar issues will be covered in different but complementary ways by English departments, history departments, and the wider school community. And it's about ensuring that we collaborate and share where those topics are being covered and how we are approaching them in different and varied ways for the learners.
Lovely. And I think that's so important, isn't it? That kind of collaborative effort. Thank you for that, Myfanwy and Verity. So my next question, why is it important to treat respectful discussion as kind of skills and knowledge to be taught from the start, rather than something that pupils should be expected to just kind of pick up along the way?
Well, it's a good idea to empower them to know how to disagree agreeably, isn't it? I know we may go on to talk about Voice 21 in a bit, I don't know, but it's something that we do a lot of in our school, so to from year 7 upwards, so that students are able to challenge in a really constructive way or build on points. But I think two of the roles that are particularly important with the Voice 21 group discussion are things like the prober's role and the clarifier's role, because I think they're not maybe as instinctive to children, but this idea of questioning what they've heard is something that we as teachers instinctively perhaps model when difficult conversations are happening, or difficult topics or controversial topics, that's one way that you can address some maybe controversial opinions and start to interrogate. So, well, why do you think that? Can you give me some evidence? So I think instilling those skills early on with students equips them to be able to interrogate what they're hearing or what they're watching, or what they're reading even. So I think that's really important with controversial issues, so that they are more equipped with it.
Absolutely. That kind of questioning for understanding, isn't it, can prevent misconceptions later on. Is there anybody who wanted to perhaps add to that point about maybe sort of starting small and starting with low stakes practice? Oh, thank you, Verity.
Yeah, I think it's really important as well, starting early on, because a lot of these children haven't had that sort of experience. So you're modelling best practice to them then in a safe and inclusive classroom atmosphere. And through that, then it's allowing the children to develop empathy and critical thinking, and as well as becoming confident in how they're going to communicate their ideas and opinions over. But again, it always keeps going back to that inclusive, democratic classroom environment that you want to create, and that will equip them for later on in life.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of explicit teaching of those skills, for example, using those Voice 21 roles that you mentioned there, Judith, with the prober and the clarifier. And it's that difference, isn't it, between providing an opportunity for discussion, but actually kind of giving that really, really explicit and clear guidance on how it can be done constructively, and avoiding the culture of avoidance as well, because we need to prepare these young people for life, don't we? What role does curriculum planning play around potentially controversial topics, and why is curriculum planning so important?
So I think curriculum planning and ensuring that we're planning how these topics are going to be approached within the curriculum is fundamental, because it ties in very closely to what we were talking about with whole school policy. It ties into our safeguarding of staff and pupils. Fundamentally, pupils need to be safe in our classrooms, and part of that, as outlined in the UN Rights of the Child, is their right to non-discrimination. They need to feel that it's a safe and inclusive environment, and we have a responsibility for their safety, but also for developing their ability to engage with topics and express themselves and their freedom of expression. And if that culture of avoidance that you mentioned, if we are not recognising the views of all pupils in our classroom, then we risk isolating pupils who potentially are from marginalised groups, who, by not confronting some of these issues around values and identity, may be further isolated. So ignoring those controversial issues has the potential for harm. We also need to safeguard staff as well, to ensure that they know how to navigate those issues. And as young people get older, we know the reality is that these topics will arise in our classroom. If not in the curriculum, then in the wider school community, in the playground, in unstructured times. The reality is that we live in a social media world. Children are increasingly exposed to quite harmful content online, and we as teachers, as parents, don't see what they're seeing online all the time. The influences that they may be seeing will differ between the pupils in the class. They just have to click on one link on social media, and immediately the algorithms will mean that they're suddenly taken down other routes, and some of those can be quite harmful. So making sure that we're building these in is really important, and we need to build in opportunities for them to cover some of these ideas about values and cultural opinions, as well as human rights. If pupils are familiar with the human rights, as they should be, because the rights of a child explicitly should be shared in schools, but if pupils are having those discussions, they're used to that environment, and we have simultaneously developed their skills to engage in respectful conversation, then when these topics do come up outside of the curriculum, then we can link those conversations back to these topics and values that we've discussed within the curriculum, and that allows staff to navigate those discussions far more easily.
Yeah, and I suppose what I'm hearing here is that it's better to have those planned opportunities and be able to kind of anticipate those issues and use them as teaching points to promote safe discussions, because, as you say, the online world is changing so fast that being as prepared as you can be is being armed, and hopefully making sure that our young people are able to interrogate different views and become these critical thinkers, and not just perhaps accept everything that they're seeing online as perhaps truth when it may not be in fact. So thank you so much for that, Myfanwy. What about then? I know we've discussed a little bit about it being a collective effort, and that teachers shouldn't be planning for this kind of in isolation. To what extent can we share the load in terms of working with colleagues? I'm thinking here about working across different subject areas and different disciplines and different domains. To kind of share the load of that. To what extent can we do that?
So if I can jump in here, now at Llangynnoed at our school, we have drop-down timetable days 5 times a year, where we look at a range of issues really. It's linked to the PSE curriculum and the RSE curriculum as well, and different subject areas are responsible for different parts of the days, because we've got 7 year groups, 5 days, so that's 35 sessions, if you like, to organise throughout the year. So I know that the head of Welsh back in our school, she's responsible for all of these days, and she has a dedicated team for the relationships and sexual education, that they are sort of trained within the that specific field anyway, to because of the nature of the subjects that they're working on. So she has a dedicated team who just do that, so that they've all signed up and they're happy to do it. But then, for example, looking at the digital literacy, for example, it's primarily our head of IT that does that, but then things like the English department have contributed lessons on clickbait, for example, and fake news, and how to recognise it. Again, how, what questions should you be asking? And again, the Welsh back feeds in really well to this. We've got a really strong culture in the school of questioning the validity of sources, and in fact, picking up on what Myfanwy was saying just now about this idea that we could be looking at something in an English lesson and say, well, do we trust, is this a trustworthy source? And you can see that kicking into it with the Welsh back. In fact, for once, they've always got the Welsh vocabulary is at the forefront of their discussion, because they're used, second nature to them. So I think this sort of whole school drop-down day, even though they're quite challenging to prepare for, it's great in that departments are often working together or bouncing off each other, and you might have a particular department has prepared the lesson, but they might not always be teaching it. So it's spread then across, and then coming back to what Verity was saying earlier about pupil voice, and we take the feedback from the students. What did they enjoy? What did they find really valuable? And then you obviously tweak your lesson planning for the next year, or for the next day, even next drop down day, I mean, so that you try and make it as robust and as valuable as possible, really. And with those days as well, coming back to what we discussed earlier about the safeguarding, we have an ASD base here at the school, and though the teachers who are involved, who run that base, they look at the resources in advance to see how they will be suitable, to see if they will suit the pupil. So they're then given a choice, maybe to be removed from those whole class lessons, and they might do the same activities, but over in the base, where it's a little bit more controlled, because obviously a lot of the topics are quite challenging, and could be potentially quite overwhelming in a big public space. So yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Judith. There's a few things there that you mentioned that I think's really important. So that kind of approach ensures that everybody recognises it as whole school, promoting that questioning and criticality of different sources, the collaboration and the quality assurance and the reassurance that staff may get from looking at resources as shared. And obviously then you've got the pupil choice and the sense of forewarning that the child may have before a potentially sensitive issue arrives, and that time as well that you've dedicated to it as a school. That's really helpful. Myfanwy, did you want to come in there?
I just wanted to link back to what Judith was just saying about the critical thinking. I think that is absolutely fundamental to a lot of these discussions. It's having that foundation that you can link back to, and that promotion of reliability of sources, making sure they're up to date, how to question where they're getting information. So when we're having these discussions, we're actually questioning the information and like the facts and the basis of those opinions and where they might come from. We actually our ICT digital department are really strong on that, and our skills teachers as well. So it's really interesting that you said that, you know, that was something that was led by the English, and as English we collaborate with other departments on that particular issue. So that's really nice to see how it really is cross-curricular. But what I was going to say is, rather than thinking about how can all share the burden, I really think it's interesting doing the drop-down day. As an alternative, it's just looking at the strengths of different departments and how we all cover these things, but actually we have strengths and variety in the way that we do. And I think that really builds a positive culture of tolerance, inclusivity, diversity that is really promoting and celebrating in those facts. So in English, you know, as I said, I am an English specialist. We use literature to develop empathy. Pupils need to feel represented, but also literature can explore those sensitive topics with an element of distance. So you know, we've had Benjamin Zephaniah has a wealth of amazing books that we've used for this. And I mean, FACE explores difficult situations with crime and peer pressure and those topics, but also ethnicity and like cultural identity. And it's really interesting to see how, like, comparing how he uses that in London, for example, compared to our local context, so making it a bit more personalised. But I mean, there have been discussions over text and literature and being used in this way, and how we make sure that it's a positive reflection of diversity and is empowering our learners, and particularly our marginalised groups. So we know that literature by women hasn't always been equally represented, or diverse ethnic groups, and there have been discussions about making sure that we don't have exclusively victim perspectives when we're looking at marginalised groups. And that ties into what we're saying about constantly reviewing our schemes of work and our literature, and how that is always an ongoing process. But then for other subjects, you have history that might tackle sensitive topics from a different point of view, and maybe they have a similar level of detachment, but via time periods rather than the characters. And again, those need to be reviewed regularly. History hasn't always recognised the roles of marginalised groups like women and different ethnicities, and celebrating our culture and our shared ideas. That's something that they do in a very different way, but it all reinforces that celebration of inclusivity. Ari, you mentioned earlier that, I mean, they do a lot of discussion founded on different perspectives on topics. So maybe a little more, so not using the literature in the same way as English, being far more current than maybe the history, but normalizing that idea of range of views. So this particular group of people will believe this of the topic, and you're normalizing the idea that there are several perspectives and recognizing all of those before considering your own judgments. So all of those really tie in, and even with languages and Welsh and MFL, looking at those shared roots of language and how so, for example, French, so much of that those words have come from, our English words have come from that French and shared language. So just opening pupils' perspectives on where they come from, our own diversity, our rich cultural heritage, that's a real celebration. So when we're talking about sensitive topics, there can be some trepidation from professionals, but actually if we can embed that culture where it's normalized that we're all different and there are different perspectives coming in, can make it more of a positive experience.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, Myfanwy, you've changed my perspective, because I was purely coming at it from a point of view of reducing pressure on on teachers and not having teachers exposed, but actually you've changed my thinking slightly there and reframed it as looking at the strengths of teachers that they can bring, and looking across the curriculum at how we can make sure that these different areas are covered really meaningfully. And I agree that, you know, literature and the distance of a different historical period can provide some safety and a perhaps more comfortable platform for discussing difficult topics. And a lot of what you said there, that we can draw out some of these principles, the planning ahead, the importance of text selection, that collaboration, and that plan, review, do cycle of the curriculum planning. So yeah, that's really, really helpful. Did anyone want to add anything to what Mavanu we were saying there, or shall I move on to our next question?
We were just in our school, we were sort of saying as well that if you work together and you have these professional conversations before you prepare and do the actual curriculum, then you've already had those what if questions. Yes. And you've already shared some knowledge prior to what may come up with the children then, with other professionals. Yeah,
definitely. And subject knowledge, I think, comes in so clearly in terms of making sure that you're prepared for potentially sensitive issues, and how that can really ground things. A really challenging question here for you all. So even with the best planning, sometimes sensitive comments or issues can come up quite unexpectedly. What do you think teachers should kind of keep in front of mind in those moments, kind of responding in the moment?
Well, I guess it's not panicking, isn't it? I guess, and not just saying the first thing that comes into your head, and just being measured, and this idea of, okay, we're just gonna, I hear what you're saying, but I'm interrogating it a bit, you know, where have you read this, where have you heard it, but also I'm just going to park this for now and I will get back to you, so that you don't get panicked into thinking that you have to think on your feet and maybe not knowing enough about it yourself. You know, there's definitely an issue with sometimes some of the things I've been reading in preparation for this talk about how teachers need to know about policies and the law, and we can't possibly know about everything. So no. It's acknowledging that, you know, instead of saying, well, leave it with me, I'm going to look that up and I'll get back to you. So, and rather than hijacking the lesson and it getting out of control then, isn't it? So I think that was one thing.
Absolutely. And I think it models a really good culture, doesn't it? To say, actually, I don't know the answer to this, or I don't know how to respond to you at the moment. I value your response. However, I'm going to have to leave it a moment and I will kind of come back to you. Verity, did you want to add to that point there?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're in the younger years in the primary, but we tend to do some rules as well. So rules before we have discussions, so children and staff sort of know the kind of atmosphere you want to create when you're dealing with sensitive conversations, in that you can say, you know, thanks for your point. You can also give it back to the children to speak to their parents or guardians at home about something if you don't feel comfortable conversing with certain things because you're worried about different ethnicities or different backgrounds that children have at home. And we have to be careful in a faith school, especially I'm thinking of from a RSE point of what we can and can't speak about. So yeah, again, it's just saying thank you for what you've said, but maybe you could go back and speak to somebody at home about this kind of question. Having those rules then in place, or we've got like a box in our classrooms where children can drop in a question in a secure lockbox at the back, and then we can they can do it anonymously, or they can put their name on it, and then we'll just touch base with our pupil if it's a personal thing they want to ask us one-to-one, just so that there's opportunities for vulnerable learners or learners who don't wish to speak in front of others as well.
Yeah, that's that's really practical what you've just said there. That's a really helpful tip to kind of have that drop box if perhaps a learner is a bit worried about whether what they're going to say is going to cause offence in someone else. That's great. Myfanwy?
Um, yeah, I think it ties into a bit of what we've both said, but it's remembering that learners want to know us, they want to build relationships with us, and there's always going to be that balance between building relationships and maintaining those boundaries. And it's remembering that we have got a responsibility to offer balanced presentations of opposing views. That is one of our responsibilities as teachers. But children often feel that teachers have the right answer and they want to know what you think, and they will ask you those questions in unstructured times, in corridor moments. And it's just remembering that we are that educational professional, and exactly like you said, Judith, it's just taking that moment to formulate your response, and that's absolutely fine. And like you say, if we normalize that idea that you want to think before you speak, but have that in a positive way, and it's just making sure that if you say yes, I will come back to you, that you actually follow up on that and do go back to that child and say, yes, this is what I wanted to say. And again, as they will raise these points, that's an inevitable part of our job day in, day out, from primary all the way to secondary, and they will often come out with things maybe they've heard or picked up on. We have quite a diverse student population with varied cultural values and attitudes. And at times, sometimes things that pupils will say or they've heard or they're repeating may be at odds with human rights and equality. So we have a duty to allow that freedom of speech and freedom of expression and encourage them to be curious, but at the same time, our safeguarding role to make sure that we're making them aware when things that are said don't align with human rights and equality. And we can do that in positive ways. And as I said earlier, if we think ahead as schools and practitioners and we have those conversations as early as possible, and the pupils are aware of the human rights, aware of discussion and varied views, then when they do come up to that, we can link it straight back to those rules and responsibilities and roles that we've discussed in lessons. You can say, oh, that's interesting. How do you think what you've just said might tie into what we're talking about human rights? And getting them to think more about where those views fit in. And I think that it's something that we know is going to be inevitable. And another thing we can do as practitioners is share when we talk to our colleagues, talk to our departments about, so when, if a pupil is bringing up comments and questions that are quite challenging in those unstructured moments, actually sharing, I was asked this today, this is how I responded, or how do you think you'd respond? And actually sharing our day-to-day experiences with the pupils.
Yeah, and I suppose using it as an opportunity for that professional learning, because you're right, it is that balance between being responsive and authentic in the moment, but also making sure the classroom is safe, inclusive, and without straying from the policy or kind of putting yourself at risk. And I liked what you said there, Verity, in terms of the discussion guidelines as well, and having those very clear parameters for what a discussion in the classroom will involve. What is acceptable, what isn't acceptable, and the opportunity to perhaps post a question gives you the chance to look at the subject knowledge or converse with colleagues, and I think there are times when I'm using the language of kind of sort of parking it, but there are times where we do need to kind of step in, don't we, and shut a conversation down if it has the risk of undermining that safe and inclusive classroom, and using our professional integrity there. So along those lines then, and again, another really sort of tricky question, how can teachers sort of guide the discussion without perhaps imposing their views or being perceived as always having the right answers, you know, if we're trying to promote discussion and debate.
I think it's important we don't always put our opinion into things as well, and rather give sort of suggested scenarios to children as well, because they are very impressionable about what we say.
Yeah.
So it's really important that we're also giving them a balanced view and trying to be subjective as opposed to them following what we think as well. And sometimes that's a good idea when we think about what we're going to say back, because initially we would say our own opinion sometimes without without imposing anything.
Yeah, and you know, it's good to try to have that objective stance. Mavanwi, did you want to come in there about kind of what the teacher role is?
Yeah, I think it's it can be varied. There isn't a right solution. It's about knowing your learners, what age they're at, what the situation is, what the learning goal is. Oxfam have some guidance in their teaching controversial issues publication, and they've outlined 6 possible roles that you can take in those discussions, and that they range from being objective, academic, very much like the like philosophy for children style, standing on the outside as facilitator only. They also suggest devil's advocate and impartial chairperson, and declaring your interest, so saying, yes, I have got a view, this is my view, so you can take that into consideration, or encouraging them to argue against you. And as I said, it's about knowing your learners. I mean, taking the devil's advocate role, for example, could be problematic in certain situations with certain pupils, but then if you've got more for the GCSE class looking at inspector calls and politics, for example, actually playing devil's advocate and explaining that that's the role you're taking, or declaring or sharing what your political viewpoints are on that scale and how that might mirror and how that matches. All those things are possible ways to engage with these conversations, but it's always about thinking about what you're trying to achieve and being open about what role and being explicit in the role you're taking.
Yeah, and that's a really, really practical strategy, isn't it? Actually saying to learners, for this situation, for this discussion, or for whatever you've said, I am going to be playing devil's advocate here, or I'm going to be neutral chair, for example. Sorry, Verity, you wanted to come in there.
Yeah, you just mentioned philosophy for children, so that's something we particularly do in our school, and obviously it's about telling children they can have their own opinion, accepting when others have got a different opinion to them, but also giving them the vocabulary in the way to speak that to others and not to cause offence. So giving them the skills of how to say, I don't agree with that, but it's because of this. And also allowing children to know that they can change their opinion, you know, because sometimes when we have these discussions, we'll split the class and say, if you think this, go this side. If you think this side, if you think this, go that side. We listen it out, debate and discuss what's gone on, and then at the end we'll do a checkpoint and say, right, if you think this, go to the left, if you think this, go to the right, just to see that, you know, your opinions can change, and sometimes the world isn't always as you've experienced it, and how other people's viewpoints and opinions can change how you see the world and how you think, I suppose, about an issue.
Yeah, definitely. That the importance of kind of helping them to form their own opinions, but also allowing that space for them to change their opinions. And as Mavan, we said earlier about knowing your learners, and that Oxfam document we'll link listeners to at the end as well. I know we touched a little bit upon knowing your learners in terms of age and stage, but I suppose as well as that, it would be the dynamic of the class, it would be maturity levels, dispositions, you know, what's happened in the learner's background. I know, for example, when I've been teaching, something's perhaps happened at lunchtime, which has meant, okay, I can't do that lesson today. I'm gonna have to do something slightly different. So that may change. You know, day to day, something might happen on the news which affects what we can and can't discuss in the classroom comfortably. Mavanwi, did you want develop any of those points? I could see your hand up.
I was just going to say what Verity was saying about getting them to change their view. Like a really useful starter is getting them to, when we do the everyone on your feet, what do you think, is actually getting them to play a game where they try and persuade someone to change their opinion and move to the other side is a nice way to like loosen it up and show that it's not all set.
Yeah, I really like that practical strategy.
And that they can have different opinions to their families at home and different opinions to their friends, and just because your friends think this, you don't have to think that, you know. As a parent, I'm having this a lot with my daughter. She's in comprehensive school with some of her friends saying this, and she's going off on her little journey, and it's like, that's fine, but you've got to appreciate why people's opinions are different. And
yeah, definitely. So brings me on to my next question there. Are there any particular tools or protocols or resources that you would recommend for other schools on their journey that might strengthen their practice in this area? So kind of which approaches have worked really well in your setting, and maybe why do you think they've worked really well?
For me, it's just P4C. I love it because it just fits into everything. It's such a powerful tool. You know, not one lesson is the same. You can work on specific skills. You know, children love having the opportunity to have their voice heard. So it's just a way of, and even if children don't, it's still enriching them, just listening to the vocabulary and the discussion that's going on around them, and it just links learning into real life scenarios and things that you want to inquire about, and develop that love of curiosity and meaningful conversations. So for me, it would be P4C.
Thanks. And Judith?
Oh, well, as well as the one Mavani mentioned, the Oxfam sheet was really good. Something I found really interesting was on the hub. It's a hyperlink from a hub document. I think it's the Association for Citizenship Teaching. Anyway, it's a resource on keeping safe online. That's what it's called. And it's there's a practitioner. He's called Joseph O'Leary. He's a training manager for Full Fact. And he talks about going into schools to teach even young children about ideas like fake news and misinformation and disinformation. And he talks about turning on your lie detector, because he says even little children understand this concept of lies. And I just thought that was really empowering. And I could see students of all ages really would get something out of that. And teachers. It's quite a nice concept that's quite user-friendly, I thought.
Absolutely. I'm quite naive, so I'd get something out of that, definitely. Mavanwi?
It's been mentioned before as well, the Voice 21 roles, and actually I think it all ties into anticipation. So yes, things will pop up unexpected and spontaneous, but planning makes such a big difference to the quality of how we can deliver and navigate particularly sensitive issues, so teachers aren't being put on the spot. So Voice 21 roles in giving them the vocabulary, like Verity was saying, about allowing them to actually articulate different opinions is useful, and having that early on so that when these topics arise, then they've got the skills to then engage with them. But also just reviewing all these schemes of work, thinking about topics that may be coming up that that may be current or being raised on social media, and having a bit of an eye on the pulse so that we can anticipate that those questions are going to come up, and start building in those topics into our schemes of work early so that we're addressing them before they become too far down the misinformation route. So obviously more recently we've had a lot of misogynistic and unhealthy relationship things that are going on social media, and any high school teacher will tell you that you start to see those signs in the discussions in their pupils around school. So it's trying to tackle that in a safe environment when we know they're being exposed to it outside, much like EastEnders do when they're tackling controversial issues, and they stick a storyline in order to kind of explore it a bit more mainstream. I think that's something that schools need to think about doing as well. So just being aware.
Yeah, absolutely. and I suppose EastEnders showcase the storyline, and then they give those kind of links to the support as well. So yeah, making sure that we've got the finger on the pulse. And the other thing that you mentioned is the reviewing cycle too. Things that culturally were accepted 20 years ago, in some cases aren't acceptable anymore. So it's making sure that we are refining things as we go along. Judith?
Yeah, I was just thinking then, it sort of links in a bit to staff training as well, but it's almost linked to the planning, that you've got a bit of a script in your head, or that you've practiced, right? What's likely to come up? How am I going to deal with this? I think that can be quite empowering. It's anyway with behaviour in class, but especially with something that's quite controversial. And to swap BBC programmes, I was watching The Traitors Uncloaked last night, and they had, this is the celebrity one, but they had some of the people from previous series on, and I've never watched it before, but I think he'd been a traitor in a previous series, and he said every night when he went back to his private space, he would write scripts about, if people say X, then I will answer with this and whatever. And it really struck me that it's the sort of thing that you can prepare for, right? So if people X says whatever, right, these are things I could say, and it's quite empowering, so that you know they might not say anything at all, but at least then you're not as flummoxed in the moment. So that could be quite useful, you know.
Lovely. We can almost use some of the Voice 21 sentence stems ourselves then, in internalising perhaps some generic things that we could say back, which have different roles to support us within the classroom. And yeah, we do that, don't we, for behaviour? We have almost an internalised script or repertoire of different strategies that we know we can go to when unexpected things crop up. So I quite like the way of linking the two, and especially linking traitors into it. I think that's great. If a colleague, coming to a close now, if a colleague asked you for one practical tip or resource that they could read or implement in the short term, what might you suggest?
Well, I would just reiterate that idea of the keeping safe online information I read on Hub. That's quite useful. That idea of turning on your lie detector, I thought was great.
We'll link practitioners to that. Thank you, Judith.
Yeah, and I'll just repeat the Teaching Controversial Issues, the guide for teachers from Oxfam. It just has everything, that quite a lot of useful advice in one place, as well as some like practical ideas.
Yeah, it's really helpful. We'll link listeners to that as well. Verity, is there anything that you'd like to end on?
I'd just say, keep yourself up to date with reading materials. When there's some lovely articles out there, and just make sure you're, not 2 steps ahead of the children, but you know what's coming through the media and things like that type of thing. So just swatting up on the issues and the controversial things and the debates and the discussions that are coming out in the news and things like that, because children listen into these conversations, and then they quite often come into school and want you to converse with them and talk about them with you, and sort of make sure you've got sort of ideas that you can share with them.
Oh, lovely. Thank you all so much for that. We've really covered some key principles in terms of whole school policy, starting young and starting low stakes. How do we balance different voices, being proactive, setting discussion guidelines? There's been some really, really practical support. And what I will do as well is make sure that all the links to the different documents and resources that we've discussed come alongside this podcast. So thank you very much for taking part. You can find out more information in terms of our professional learning on the CSC cronfa.cymru website. You'll also be able to follow our social media posts on X and now Instagram. And this is part of a wider piece of professional learning. So stay tuned for even more school exemplification. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Diolch am wrando ar y bennod hon o Sgwrs. Cofiwch ein dilyn ar Twitter a Facebook, tan ysgrifio ein sianel YouTube, ymuno yn cymunedau ar ein gwefan a darllen ein bwletin ysgolion wythnosol am y newyddion diweddaraf. Thanks for listening to this episode of Sgwrs. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter and Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube channel, join our online communities via our website, and read our weekly school bulletin for the latest news. Hwyl am y tro. Bye for now.